this course, the topic is life, and especially with an emphasis on life elsewhere in the universe. So, if we're going to talk about life, we should probably come up with a robust definition of what is life, what does it mean for something to actually be alive. So, what is life? And as a thought experiment, we could say, what if you were to land on an alien planet or on a moon around some other planet? You step out of your spaceship and you walk around, and then you see this interesting thing. Uh, how would you be able to recognize whether or not this thing is alive? On Earth, there are some plants that, well, they don't really move around and they really closely resemble rocks. So, how would we be able to recognize a living entity from a non living entity, like some weirdly shaped rock? So, many biology textbooks provide a list of qualities that an entity must possess for that entity to be considered alive. Now, this list I'm going to provide is not thorough, and if you think for a while, you could probably come up with some of these criteria, some things that are alive that might violate some of these criteria. Or you might be able to come up with some non-living thing that satisfy a lot of these criteria. So the question of what is life doesn't really have a good, thorough answer that is widely accepted by biologists universally. But nevertheless, many biologists seem to agree that living things should take in complex molecules in some form. They should break those complex molecules down, and in the process of breaking those complex molecules down and reassembling them into some other type of molecule, energy is going to be released. Some of those molecules that got broken down into other things are going to be expelled. Some of the energy that is released in this chemical reaction is going to be used to power other processes going on inside this entity. Basically, this is just nothing but a very technical way to say everybody eats and everybody poops. So living things will need to eat, they will need to take in energy, release the energy, and there will be waste that needs to be expelled. Also, living things all seem to process information to one degree or another. Now, as you're watching this video and listening to the audio, you have particles of light entering your eyes. Your eyes then send signals into your brain. So watching a video, your eyes are detecting information and then your brain is processing this information. Meanwhile, as you listen to the audio, the same story is happening in your ears, where you're hearing sound. That sound wave is measured by the eardrum inside your ear, and nerves are changing the information of that sound into electrical impulses. Those electrical impulses travel through your nerves into your brain, and then your brain decodes those electrical impulses and is able to translate them into what I'm saying. So in that manner, the idea in my brain, I am able to change into a sound through my voice. The sound of my voice is picked up by a computer microphone. Then it is transmitted over the internet to your computer. And then your computer is changing that electrical information into a sound wave and into light. And then that sound and light from your computer speakers and your computer screen are being sent into your eyes and into your ears, and they travel through the nerves into your brain. So that is basically a very roundabout way of having an idea from my head be able to be transported into your head through many steps. Now, my dog is also able to process information. If my dog hears another dog across the street barking or sees someone come up to the front door, that information of someone at the front door, the light from that bounces off the person goes into my dog's eyes. My dog's brain translates that into somebody at the door, and he starts barking a lot. And even something like a plant. Plants will tend to seek out light in many cases. So if you put a plant where the plant is half in light, half in shadow, the plant will tend to grow. So in many cases, these plants will tend to grow and angle towards the light. So the plants are reacting to their environment and, to an extent, processing information where they want to be by the light. Now, living things also very often will reproduce and make more versions that are very similar to one degree or another of themselves. And living things are very often made of cells. Now, there is a debate, is a virus alive or not? And some scientists say viruses are non-living things. They're kind of in a gray area between living and non-living. Others think they are living things and should be considered as alive. But again, there is no universally accepted answer to the question, are viruses alive or not? But even instead of thinking of cells as a biological entity, let's just say living things seem to have a barrier between inside and outside, where living things are made of cells. The cells have membranes. And so there is a notion of inside and outside of that cell, whether it's the proper biological cell with the membrane and all the other cell parts, or maybe we could consider viruses too, because they do have a wall, a barrier between the inside the virus versus outside. And then all these cells come together to make me. And I have skin. So the skin is the barrier between my insides and the outside environment surrounding me. Living things also interact with their surroundings. This is very similar to processing information that I described earlier, where a plant will try to grow towards light. In many cases, for the plants that like that, my dog will bark if a person comes up by the door. So that is an example of interacting with your surroundings. Now, the extent to which you could interact with your surroundings, well, that might depend on what species you are, how cognizant you are of your surroundings, how much you are able to process information. My brain is, by most measures, able to process information about my surroundings much more actively than a houseplant. So in that case, I could interact in a much more intricate way with my surroundings versus just the basil plant in the kitchen that we have. Now, if we're going to investigate the possibility of life elsewhere in the universe, we should probably begin by looking at the one example of where we're fairly certain life does exist, and that is on Earth. Now, we notice that by learning about life on Earth, all life on Earth seems to be based on carbon and water. So why is this? Why is this a common theme to all life that we know of so far? So here's the periodic table of the elements. This is basically just a list of all the elements, all the different types of atoms that there are. Hydrogen, which the sun burns at its core, changes it into helium. In fusing hydrogen into helium, you give off energy. We talked about in 113 how that energy supports the weight of the upper layers of the sun. And then helium could burn into lithium and beryllium, then boron, carbon, oxygen. At the end of the sun's life, it'll be a big ball of carbon and oxygen as a white dwarf. And then here you have iron, Fe. This is the extent to which stars can burn or fuse in the main sequence. All the elements after iron, so cobalt, nickel, copper, zinc, cadmium, mercury, gold, everything down beyond iron is then created in supernova explosions or neutron star collisions known as kilonova. So the periodic table is just a list of all the elements arranged in a certain way by some really brilliant chemists who decided this is actually a very natural way of why they should be arranged. I can't really tell you the reasoning behind why they are arranged this way, but it is a common thread that this is a good way to arrange the elements. So we also have water. Now, water is not on the periodic table. Carbon is on the periodic table, but water is made up of a combination of hydrogen and oxygen. So carbon is an element because it's just one type of one atom. Water is a molecule. So a molecule is just two or more atoms. So 2 hydrogen plus 1 oxygen gives me water. Now, we could ask the question, suppose sometime 10, 50, 75 years from now, we discover life elsewhere in the universe. would it be reasonable to expect that life on another planet to also be based on carbon and water? And then when we discover life on another planet, some number of years in the future, what if we discover life on another planet? So now we know of life on Earth and life on two planets elsewhere in the universe. Would it be reasonable to expect, we know life on Earth is based on carbon and water, would it be reasonable to expect that life on those other two planets are based on carbon and water? Would it be reasonable to expect life elsewhere in the universe will almost always be based on carbon and water? Now, I want to argue that the answer to this question is probably going to be yes, but I'm not going to be too confident in my statements here. So, we notice that life seems to possess a certain degree of complexity. Now, regardless of however you want to define what life is, life will involve many complicated chemical reactions. So here are some examples of some protein molecules. So each of these balls is an atom, and then the atoms are bonded to other atoms or connected to other atoms in certain ways. And this molecule has a ton of atoms. I have no clue what's going on with this. Here's another example of some type of protein. Apparently a protein is something, if you want to know what protein formally is, learn about in a biology class. But you have a bunch of stuff all connected together. Inside each of these stuff, you have some types of atoms. Here's some carbon, some whatever R is, some hydrogen, some oxygen. So the takeaway message is these molecules that make up life are really, really complex. Because what would it take to process information? What would it take to take in molecules, break them down, reassemble them? What would it take to reproduce, to form another copy of yourself? These will, however they work, they will probably be very complicated processes, so they'll probably need fairly complicated chemistry to be able to occur. So here are some examples of some proteins, some molecules that for life on Earth is very important. Here are some examples of some amino acids. Even though these amino acids have fewer atoms than the proteins we saw on the previous slide, here's some guanine, here's some cytosine, some thymine, and some adenine. These amino acids combine together to form the structure of the DNA molecule, which is very important for life on Earth.